Welcome to my short rant. Today I'm going to be going over a report from a bunch of researchers at Yale. And so Yale assesses the Russian economy and wow, just wow. Basically, it's not looking good for the Russian economy. So the title of this is Business Retreats and Sanctions Are Crippling the Russian Economy. Measures of current economic activity and economic outlook point to devastating impact on Russia. That's the title and the subtitle, because academics always have a subtitle. Not always, but most of the time. So the point is that they kind of say it at the beginning. And so we have these 5 researchers who have gone in and they have looked at a lot of stacks, and they're all at the Yale Chief Executive Leadership Institute. So they're business folks who are looking at a lot of different statistics, some of them proprietary, but they have used a lot of Russian language sources. And so they've really been able to get in and look at things from an angle that a lot of folks haven't. And they say, look, we've got this misunderstanding out there of how the Russian economy is actually holding up. And they say that part of the problem is that the Kremlin's cherry-picked the statistics. They've dropped metrics that are unfavorable out of their statistics and their reporting. And by the way, Russia reports a lot of statistics. They have a very lingering Soviet state bureaucracy that measures a lot of things, and they have a lot of statistics available. But the idea is that they've basically, by picking the things that are looking good, dropping metrics that don't work good, they've cherry-picked and distorted the statistics, which the media and well-meaning experts, they say, have just repeated these, right? They've repeated the Putin, as they call them, Putin-selected stats. This has led to this view that, the Russians are doing well or not nearly as bad as we think. And so they say, look, this outlook is just overly optimistic from the Russian point of view or gloomy for the effect of sanctions. And so they have they go through this report, 118 pages, have a lot of interesting stuff, but let's just look at the key conclusions they come to. One conclusion is, hey, looking at the export data, Russia's positioning as a commodities exporter has, as I say, irrevocably deteriorated, right? That they've lost a lot of their market share and their position in the world has just dramatically changed. They also note that Russian imports have largely collapsed, and they're just not getting things from the imports that from businesses overseas, and this has led to shortages and just a major collapse of a lot of their stuff. And this is the business retreat, right? They see the sanctions as having an effect, but they also see a lot of business retreat as investment is not going on. Companies have lost export markets. They've lost their access to key inputs from overseas and have gone out of business or stopped working as much. And so this is the retreat aspect of it. They also note that the shift to China, has not worked either import or export wise, that Russia has not been able to shift a lot of its exports of materials to China, largely because they can't, the gas is a major export and they can't get that to China. Their western grid doesn't connect to China. And also China they have stats that show that China has been throttling back its relationship with Russia. So this, their trade is just in the dumpster. Domestic production, they say complete standstill, and their stats show a drop off of production in a lot of industries. Complete standstill, might be a bit dramatic here, but they really say, look, domestic production has really collapsed, and as we're just seeing that there's been a brain drain. There's been a lot of businesses have been lost, and they just don't see a capacity to replace these things. they estimate that as a result of the business retreat, right, which is what that's part of, right? I've been mentioning it maybe a little early, but Russia has lost companies representing close to 40% of its GDP, which is a big hit, right? So we have a lot that's been going on, and they haven't been able to do the import substitution that, this whole fortress Russia, and we're going to make things here and, replace the lost business with domestic. No, that just simply hasn't been happening, or not enough to avoid losing 40% of the GDP. So as a result, right, they see that Putin is got a lot of policies, right? The budget has gone into deficit for the first time. They normally, they don't normally have to worry about that, right? You have all these oil revenues and energy revenues. And so they've had to put in a lot of drastic measures. And one thing they noted that to cover the budget deficit, they've drawn down their rainy day fund, that, the sovereign fund of money that the Russian government has, by a third, right? They've spent already a third of their the money they've set aside to cover this deficit. And so that's unsustainable, right? And a lot of the other policy interventions are similarly not going to work. And so the time, you get a sense there that the clock is ticking, right? You burned through a third of your rainy day fund. And, sure, there are things, right? There are statistics that, even with higher oil prices, Putin has, sure, they're selling less oil, but the oil revenue, people noted the oil revenue is about the same, stayed the same for Russia from one year to the next. And yet, and they're selling to China and they're selling oil to India. But at a third, they're selling at a discount, and oil prices are going back down, right? And so this question of how long this lasts is interesting. It's something I know I'm going to be looking at. Are we in a race, right? Are the sanctions racing the war the way they did in the Italy's invasion of Ethiopia and the League of Nations sanctions against it, right? So this is for me a very interesting question, something to look at. They know that Russian domestic financial markets, when they look at the markets, they look what's going on, they're the worst in the world, right? And they say, look, the things we're looking at are both a measure of present conditions and investors betting on the future. And so there's this idea that the market information indicates both the assessment of people in Russia about the way things are, right, or investors that would invest in Russia. This is the logic or the wisdom of the crowd, right? And also there's a future, right? They're looking at the future and they say, look, they're the worst performing markets in the entire world, whatever else you might have heard. Now my thing is like, okay, they're worst performing in the world. That's not good for Russia, but also, I don't know if that's going to lead to Putin collapsing. And I think a big distinction here is, has to be drawn between the economic pain, the impact of sanctions and the war, because part of this is also not just sanctions, but the disruption caused by starting a war, right? The markets react negatively. And so sanctions, they have an effect, but then the war, the uncertainty, the risk has an effect on things like investment, that sort of thing. The thing is, we have to look at, there are these impacts, but then there's the political effectiveness, right? The sanctions are put on with an intent. And are you actually, going to realize that intent? Are they going to have the desired effect politically in terms of getting Putin to do something different? And that is a big difference. So, there's a tendency to equate higher impact with more likely success, which is not a bad there's reason for thinking that, but you have to keep in mind it's not a one-for-one. It's not deterministic. And in fact, they're very often not connected. So their final point, right? Their conclusion is this is a quote. All these things have been, I've been cherry picking. Well, no, in a way I haven't. These were what these guys, the researchers picked as their main points. So no, I haven't been cherry picking. I've had to shorten things, but looking ahead, there's no path out of economic oblivion for Russia as long as the allied countries remain united in maintaining and increasing sanctions pressure against Russia, which is an interesting, one, you have to be willing to do that. And that's always a question. Two, there's a question of how much the sanctions are doing it versus disruption. But, and like I said, this oblivion, right? Now, sure, if you're down on Russia, if you're rooting for Ukraine, you like to hear words of like oblivion used for the Russian economy. However, dictators, and Putin has been, moving very steadily in that direction, right? One thing about the war has been to solidify control over the country. And so, sure, there's been a brain drain. A lot of people have left Russia. A lot of oligarchs have fled, a lot of the rich people. And, his propaganda was, well, we don't need these people. They're not really Russian in their mentality anyway. That was, way back. He said that months ago. That's propaganda. But at the same time, well, there's always this question of, well, does not having those people around really hurt his power, right? Or is he solidifying control over what's left? That's a real question. And because dictators can stay in power in the face of economic oblivion, right? But I do think these guys are looking at what they're looking at, and impact, right? And that's an important thing. And it's certainly in their wheelhouse. And I think they have done more here, 118 pages. So the paper itself and the slide deck, they actually have their slide deck available at ssrn.com, and the whole thing is there. I'll put the link in the video description to make it easier for you. But very interesting analysis. It really does, Russia is really suffering, as one would expect, and we are perhaps underestimating that. The question is how that will, we're underestimating the impact. The question is, what's the political efficacy here? That's what we got to look for in the future. Thank you for watching my short rant. I hope it was short and not too much of a rant. I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and though I teach at Troy University, this video is my own work. Troy University has neither approved nor reviewed the content. So there. And if you want to learn more about Troy anyway, figure out who would hire a guy like this, you can always go to www.troy.edu. I also am going to have a little card popping up here that you can go see my bio and some information about where I teach, which will descend to shameless self-promotion, but I want more students. What can I say? And finally, the music you've been listening to is Tonight at 8 by Shane Ivers. So thank you for listening, and I hope you'll come back and enjoy another short rant.